Welcome all of you. My name is Dr. Mohammad Fiaz from University of Education, DG Khan campus. Today we will cover the topic of cultural control. This control method is aimed either at reducing the sources of inoculum or at reducing exposure of plants to infection. Its primary objective is the prevention of pest damage and not the destruction of existing and damaging pest population. Since these control tactics usually modify the relationships between a pest population and its natural environment, they are also known as less commonly as ecological control methods. These practices, which are implemented in the cultural control, are good soil preparation, use of indigenous varieties, use of mesh screen, roguing or pruning, encouraging insect predators, multiple cropping, and crop rotation. Uh, and we will cover each one of these topics one by one. This is the first important element in pest control strategy. A healthy means healthy plants which are relatively more resistant to pests should be selected for population. A soil rich in humus hosts a wide variety of beneficial microflora that trap nematodes and destroy or keep in dormancy diseased organisms, thereby encouraging beneficial insects. The purpose of land preparation is to provide the necessary soil conditions which will enhance the successful establishment of the young offshoots or the tissue cultural plants received from the nursery. Traditional varieties are hardier and relatively more resistant to pests. They can withstand harsh environmental conditions better than modern hybrids. When buying seeds or plants, try to choose those with built-in resistance to disease and nematodes. Sources for this information includes extension fact sheets, seed catalogs, and plant and seed packages. It may be better to forego some production capability in favor of the increased pest resistance if you must make such a choice. During the growing season, stressed plants can lose their resistance to pests, so be sure the crop has the water and nutrients it needs. When shopping for seeds and plants, check the labels for abbreviations similar to these used to designate various types of pest resistance or tolerance. Use of mesh screen, it means younger plants are usually preferred by insects and they suffer significantly from such attacks when compared to older plants. Therefore, a single netting over the plants during the first 30 to 45 days of their growth can reduce pest damage. Also, the net helps diffuse sunlight, thereby improving the quality of some vegetables. Finally, the net breaks the impacts of raindrops, thus reducing physical damage to the plant and reducing soil erosion from the beds. Next is roguing or pruning. During the dormant phase, removal and destruction of dead, diseased, or infested wood can greatly reduce overwintering stages of pest populations and thus their spread the next year. For example, mite eggs, aphids, scale, and fire blight infestation terminals. In apples and other fruit trees, pruning water sprouts, sucker growth, or foliage that is preferred by aphids helps control these pests. Pruning that is excessive, for example, in relation to fertilization practices, can increase the population of certain pests such as mites, aphids, and leafhoppers. This method is used to reduce pest infestation through the removal of breeding and hibernating sites. Sanitation has broad applicability. To be most effective, it requires knowledge of the habits of the pest species and careful timings. It involves eradication of harmful weeds, hosts, or alternate hosts, timely destruction of crop residues, and cleaning of field borders of alternate hosts, and removal of scrub or shelter in which pests might hide. For example, in orchards, destruction of cull or dropped fruits and pupation sites for codling moth in apple and plum curculio may be achieved by means of livestock and section or cultivation equipment. Is encouraging insect predators. Pests can be controlled by their natural enemies too, by growing a variety of flowering plants, specifically those belonging to Umbelliferae family, such as fennel and celery. Insect predators will be attracted to stay in the garden. These beneficial insects feed on pests, keeping the pest population below economic injury level. In nature, pests are usually controlled by the presence of insect predators and parasites, which keep the populations of the harmful insects in control. Most of the insects in nature are either beneficial or at least harmless. There are many ways to encourage insect predators in any area. For example, create a suitable habitat for insect predators. Flowering shrubs and trees throughout the garden will attract many beneficial insects, including parasitic wasps, which require pollen and nectar for their growth and maturity. Plants belonging to Umbelliferae family are particularly effective in attracting natural enemies of the pests. Another point is provide alternate hosts for pests. To ensure availability of food for the beneficial organisms, grow alternate host plants along fence lines and in between cultivated crops. The natural enemy populations on these alternate host plants will control pests attacking the cultivated crops. The next is multiple cropping. In this approach, more than one crop is grown on the same piece of land. This reduces phytophagous insect pests by encouraging increases in natural enemies. This provides genetic diversity to minimize pest increases. Variation in susceptibility among species or varieties to a particular disease is great. Given abundant hosts of a single species or variety, a pest could easily be spread from host to host. When the number of hosts declines, the pest incidence will also decrease for lack of necessary food for the organism. In some cases, intercropping lowers the overall attractiveness of the environment, as when host and non-host plants are mixed together in a single planting. But in other cases, intercropping may concentrate the pest in a smaller, more manageable area, so it can be controlled by some other tactics. Strips of alfalfa, for example, are sometimes interplanted with cotton as a trap crop for mirid bugs. The alfalfa, which attracts ladybug more strongly than cotton, is usually treated with an insecticide to kill the bugs before they move into the adjacent field of the cotton. Next is crop rotation. An effective rotation in which a crop of one plant family is followed by one from a different family that is not a host crop of the pest to be controlled. Most common rotations include grasses, legumes, and root crops. Rotations are effective against pests that have a limited host plant range and dispersiveness, and that cannot survive for more than one or two seasons without suitable host crops. Pests most subject to this type of control are poorly mobile, soil inhabiting species with a restricted host range and a life cycle of 1 year or longer. In some crops, it is possible to create discontinuity in the pest food supply simply by altering the time of year for planting or harvesting. This strategy, often known as phenological asynchrony, allows farmers to manage their crops so it remains out of phase with pest populations. Sweet corn, for example, can escape most injury from corn earworm Helicoverpa zea if it is planted in early spring and harvested before larvae mature. This was all about managing the cultural practices to control the insect pests. And now we will discuss about the advantages and disadvantages of this control method. First, we will highlight the advantages of control program, that it requires no extra skills to be implemented. All practices which were applying during the cultivation of crops are manipulated for the purpose of controlling the insect pests. These control methods are usually inexpensive because they are generally necessary for producing or using a commodity, often with pest management as a secondary priority. Further, no special equipment is needed for the implementation of cultural control program. The last, not the least, cultural control program is ecologically safe when we compare to the other control programs like chemical control. Let's talk about disadvantages of cultural control program. As you know, everything which has merits must possess demerits. The first disadvantage of cultural control is being limited to only specific pests. Mean at one time not all the pests are eradicated at all. Different control practices at different time levels are required to control every different pest. Further, if we are implementing cultural control and unfortunately we miss the time at which control has to be implemented, we are all done. No extra time is available. So time is critical to decide whether to implement or to delay for a certain period of time. As you know, the implementation needs a long-term planning. Sometimes it becomes laborious to even implement. However, mentoring the demands uh, mentioning the demands or demerits, is also clear that having less demerits makes this control program a successful element in integrated control program. So this was all about the today's lecture. See you in the next one.